Hi there, I'm Amy.
And I'm Sue.
And we're the mother-daughter duo behind Chatter Matters.
Each week, we're going to be chatting through everyday challenges and how we navigate them as two women from different generations.
So get yourself comfy, grab your cup of tea or coffee, and let us show you why Chatter Matters.
Oh,
Hello.
I am back from Malaysia. It's lovely to see you, Amy.
It's very nice to see you too. You're looking all sort of not jet laggy, which I think is fantastic, given you were there for such a short period of time.
It was an in and out, and I think I
was.
probably got about a total of 5.5 hours sleep over 2 nights.
Which is madness. I don't know how you were able to function and like deliver work on such little sleep. Like I would have been a gremlin to be around.
Adrenaline. Adrenaline is a beautiful
Crazy.
thing.
And you don't even drink caffeinated coffee. That's the other thing. Like you don't drink. You're a superwoman. That's all I've concluded.
But I'm back, which I'm very happy for, and it's lovely to see you. And thank you for looking after the dog.
No worries, anytime. I like my little sort of country getaways, you know, to look after the dog. It's quite nice to be able to like get into the hills and the forest, and yeah,
Beautiful.
delightful.
Well, we were chatting about what to do this week, and I think Amy and I were talking about that in previous episodes. We talked about how to build a relationship between parent and child.
Yep.
We talked about communicating with siblings, which
Yep.
we did in our last episode. And actually, the conversation that Amy and I were having was actually probably the most important relationship that you need to be able to communicate with is yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like learning the inner workings of your own brain and how that helps or doesn't help you is like the most helpful thing that you can do for yourself. Beyond any kind of conversations that you have with other people, it's like, because we've spoken a lot about how we manage our mind.
Yeah.
But actually it goes a bit beyond just active management of your mind, and there's other bits that go into it as well.
There are. And also I think when you're communicating with yourself, there's a often when I'm working with people, there's a real cut-off from the head up, you know, like they're not communicating with their bodies. They're
Right.
not tuning into their feelings and their emotions, which is
So
also...
yeah, when you say communicating with your body, what does that mean?
Being in tune. So I know when I'm experiencing a feeling that I can name it. I know where it happens in my body. So if I'm feeling tight in my stomach, I'm tuning into that communication that my body is giving me. Or if I've got a headache, you know, I'm kind of acknowledging that all is not well. So there's something also about how your body is communicating with you all the time. It's just are you listening?
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I always remember whenever like I would feeling big emotions when I was little, you'd be like, okay, where are you feeling it? And like, what is it? And I think also there's an element of that helps you almost, it stops being so abstract, your feelings, then when you talk about it, bringing into your body. So like, I know I hold all my anxiety in my shoulders. Like when I start getting tingly shoulders and like they come right up against my ears, then I know that that's because I'm starting to feel quite anxious about something. But that's all because you'd be like, okay, where are you feeling it? And I remember being little, being like, what the fuck do you mean? I don't know. It's just a feeling. It doesn't go anywhere in my body. But then the more that you think about it, the more you can isolate little bits of you that are like, actually, that's where I'm holding the tension, or that's where it's not feeling quite right.
Yeah, because I mean, as a human being, you're a whole system. You know, which is
this coffee is strong.
Oh,
I mean, fantastic, but whoo, I'm going to be awake in about 20 minutes.
I thought I'd give you some caffeine to get you going.
I'm just sat here like, wow, that is a lot of coffee.
So I was thinking about how your whole body is a system and how your caffeine will
exactly. We're about to see what this caffeine does to this system in a second. Jeez.
So I think being able to communicate with understanding your mind, understanding how your body is communicating with you, how your feelings are trying to express something, is all part of self-knowledge. Yeah. And I think if you understand yourself, then it gives you a whole degree of power over how you show up and how and who you want to be, in the world. So we thought this episode we talk about ways of self-help. Yeah. So how do you tune into yourself? How do you support yourself? So we thought we might talk about self-help over the generations, because it has definitely shifted.
My God, that is a big old shift, isn't it?
From my mum through to me, through to you, if we look at the kind of ancestral lineage of women, you know, kind of what's acceptable now and what's not. And I'd also love to talk about men, because I think that's really changed even from my generation to your generation.
Massively.
I think the willingness for men to help themselves. I think there's permission being given there. So we're going to talk about that, and then Amy and I will share some stuff that we've done in terms of being able to build our own self-awareness and things we've experienced, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And then, as always, at the end, we'll do a little bit of hints and tips for anyone that's listening that, I don't know, might find it useful.
No, I think that sounds good. So I think the thing that I would like to start with is, like, what do you think about when you hear the word self-help? Because I think it's such a buzzword now that and it can be quite loaded as well, I think, for people, and it can mean so many different things. So I guess to center the conversation, what does it mean to you?
When I think self-help, I think Waterstones and bookshelf.
I was gonna say the same thing. It's like the Kumbaya ya books, and I know you own a lot of the Kumbaya ya books, but like, that's so interesting. That's exactly where I go as well. Like pictures of like very serious people on the front of covers with lots of words swirling around them about how they're going to change your life just by reading these 350 pages.
And I think there's a whole industry that's been created with a lot of people making a lot of money out of talking shit, frankly. And some of the books,
you're going to make me spit out my coffee.
and some of the books are actually very good.
I've read some fantastic ones.
Have you?
But,
and of course, when you talked the other day about you having your fictional, your fantasy and your romance, I have the equivalent of non-fiction leadership books and self-help books in my bookshelf. I don't have many of the fictional stuff.
I was going to say, I remember growing up and like we'd go on a holiday and you'd bring a non-fiction book with us on holiday, and I was like, what on earth is wrong with this person? Like, I don't get it. But you enjoy reading about it, right?
I do. So self-help bookshelves.
Yeah, that's what you vision.
I also see, because I've done a lot, courses, you know, that people go on, weekend sort of retreaty type courses, which also there's a lot of, there's some good ones and there's some pretty poor ones. So I also think about that in terms of self-help.
Yeah.
But, you know, for me, fundamentally, I think as we become more conscious of ourselves and more science reveals the power of our mind, and this connected system that we were talking about earlier on. I mean, I do think I'm really pleased that the dialogue around helping yourself has definitely ramped up from my time to your time.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the interesting things that I think we'll get into is how it's ramped up, and has it almost gone too far the other way? Because I think when I hear self-help, I do the exact same thing with you. I think of the bookshelves, I think of the like paralysis of choice of how you can help yourself, and all of, you know, like I think the thing that's very big at the moment is like, get up at 5 a.m. and you're gonna go and do your workout and you're gonna eat all your protein, and I know that's partly because my algorithm is very active and it's very focused on leading an active life. But it's that like, oh, these are the routines. You know, I remember it back when I was like 12, of like, these are the routines that the top 20 CEOs follow. And they all get up at 3 a.m. and like, you know, and like they survive off of 2 hours sleep and, I don't know, drugs or something. But like, you know, it's this whole, I think, oh, hello, stretching out. I think that's initially where my mind goes, is almost like this aggressive industry of like, if you're not doing all of these things, then you're not going to be successful and you're not looking after yourself and like all of this kind of stuff. So I think that's where my mind goes initially. But actually what self-help means to me is doing the little things that help me stay grounded and you know, and also sometimes not the little things. I think there's a lot of very big things that I have done to help myself, like go to therapy and go to counselling, and all of that for me is all wrapped up. You know, it's such a again, I go back to it's such a loaded word. And I think, you know, we've spoken about this before around like the sibling dynamic piece of it's about what it means to you. And I think working out how you feel with the word self-help, and maybe the word self-help isn't the right word that you use to describe the way that you look after yourself. But yeah, I think for me, it actually means a myriad of like the building blocks of all the little things and the big things that make me a better human.
Yeah, nice. I think that's right. And then a better human, and how you then show up day to day.
Yeah.
You know, in the best, so to be the best version of yourself, you know, and I think sometimes finding out what that version is a journey of discovery.
Yeah.
You know, I can remember the reason why I really got into all of this work initially was because my mum had, you know, as you know, your nanny had schizophrenia, bipolar. I mean, in her, I mean, she had it from the age of 16, and she went through the whole thing of they didn't really understand the mind, you know, and it was straitjackets and electrocution, you know, which is just barbaric when you think about it, you know, now. And I always felt like, you know, mum, you know, she had a condition and it was managed principally through chemicals, through medicine. So she saw a psychiatrist and they would keep loading her up with more and more medicines. And if, you know, and she hated it. She hated having to live her life through tablets and wanted to constantly come off them. But as soon as she started to come off them, then her episodes would flare up again. But I never saw her go and get talking therapy.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's probably in my early 20s when she had her last episode and she was sectioned and she went off to a, you know, a mental hospital. Yeah. I think that was probably what sparked my whole interest in there must be a better way of managing yourself. And surely you can't just go through this cycle of living on drugs and then, you know, and then having an episode and being, you know, sectioned. Yeah. But I think at that point, you know, I look back now and think, why didn't she ever go and have therapy? And it was never offered to her, but also my dad or my mum never asked, you know, never explored it. It was like it almost wasn't an option for them.
Well, and I can also imagine, you know, because when in the world, when in time we're talking about what, the 1980s, 1990s?
70s and 80s.
70s,
I mean, she would have.
I've got no idea what the state of talking therapy was like at that time, you know, because I think that's the other thing. So I've mentioned on a previous episode, but I studied psychology at university, and it is such a junior science, you know, like if I remember studying it when I was doing the IB, which is equivalent to A-levels in the UK. And I remember my teacher talking about, you know, physics and chemistry have got centuries worth of work behind them. Psychology's existed for about 100 years. So it's right at the beginning of this understanding of the mind and how we can help it. And I think, you know, so I you know, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm some kind of psychology historian, but I wouldn't be surprised in the 70s and 80s if actually the talking therapy, you know, it would have been right in the seminal moments of it starting and being, you know, and I'm sure there were some fantastic talking therapists at that time, but I wonder how difficult it was to find them.
Yeah, and certainly not available. So I would imagine if, you know, I was thinking mum was born in her 40s, you know, then she would have had her first episode, you know, in early 60s. You know, for then you just got locked up. You know, you were seen as a crazy woman. You know, and you were locked up and removed from society. So I think if I think about our female lineage and, you know, I think I remember in my early 20s thinking, could I catch this? Because it was so unknown. And I remember getting really worried that actually, would I mentally go like that myself? And I think that's really what set me on my own journey of discovery of actually, I don't want to be like that. So how can I help myself as much as I possibly can? And I think through my 20s, I just went on a massive journey of discovery, of reading, going on courses, retreats, because I didn't want to experience that. And if I could help myself in some way, then I wanted to be able to do that.
And I think the important thing there is that, like, it's not necessarily about the conditions she was experiencing itself, but it was the way that it manifested, right? And like the uncomfortable and kind of scary situations it put you in. And so I think that's, you know, I think that's for me the key of like when I go back to, again, it's like my very first psychology lesson, and our teacher told us about the definition of psychology, which is to ameliorate the human condition. And I remember being like, what is that word? I've never heard of it before. But ameliorate is what you were talking about, of like, how do I become the better version of myself? How do I continue to improve? And I can imagine in your 20s it being rooted in like self-protection of like, I want to make sure that I'm okay, and I don't make anyone feel like the way that I've felt.
And also I wanted to live a full life,
Yeah.
and not be constantly worried that this, I don't know, disease,
Yeah.
you know, was going to catch up with me, and then I wouldn't be able to live a, you know, a full life. So it was a degree of protection, but also I want to, almost feeling like out of control, you know, that I wanted some degree of control back.
Interesting. And then, as you say, going through that like female lineage, it's so interesting seeing like that as a catalyst for you to be really interested in it. And then I was then brought up in a house where that kind of stuff is interesting, and we spoke about it, and like I knew I wanted to study psychology from like age 14 or something like that. Like I was really lucky that I had worked out the thing that I was interested in from such a young age. And I, you know, you go back into that nature versus nurture debate, right? Of like, how much of it did I actually just learn from you and go, this is really interesting, and I've spoken about it so much that I want to understand it more, or actually was that just always something that I was going to find interesting?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I could then come at self-help. I think both you and I actually, in different ways, but we can look at self-help from what we have learned and can do for ourselves, and then equally we have a bit of an academic lens on it as well, from all of the things we've picked up through the years.
Yeah, so I think you know, deeply fascinating, you know, subject. I guess the other bit I wanted to talk about was for men, in terms of when I think about self-help. I mean, the other bit that's very different from my generation to your generation. I mean, men, it was, you know, we talked about it last time, men don't cry, don't talk about their feelings. You know, we actually didn't really talk about mental health. I mean, that's a whole new discourse of conversation that, you know, is openly talked about. And I'm thrilled now that there are male retreats, you know, that men are also going on that journey of discovery and trying to understand themselves. And I'm just so excited that now is okay in society.
I think it's getting more okay.
That's
I think
true.
we live in a part, you know, I think the part of society you and I choose to be involved with, it's very accepting of men being open about their emotions. I don't think that's
across
the case
everything,
across the board. You know, even if we were just to take the UK as an example, there will certainly be cultures, and there will be, you know, pockets of society where that you know, man must be masculine, and masculine therefore means effectively the only acceptable emotion is anger. You know, so I think I totally agree that we have come a long way. I think we've come a long way in certain areas of society. I think there's a lot of catching up, or a lot of opening up, not catching up, because that makes it feel like they're behind. And and I don't think that's the right wording to use, because it's not that anyone is behind the other. I think it's just potentially it's not been open. You know, I
think it's more permissible.
Yes.
You know, to go to therapy if you need to go to therapy, or to go to a male retreat.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's more permission now for men to do that exploration, rather than it just not even being a conversation.
No, 100%. And I think that's the beauty. You know, there are so many downsides to social media that we've spoken about, but there is real beauty in the accessibility it grants to information, to new role models. You know, there's a fantastic influencer who I follow called Ben West, who does a huge amount of campaigning and awareness raising for young male mental health, because his brother died by suicide, and you know, and does a huge amount of campaigning with politicians, with the NHS, about increasing awareness and accessibility for mental health resources for children in general, but specifically for young boys. And I think it's people like him that are so important to just come across the feeds on social media of young boys, of young men, and again, it's that more we talk about it from a diversity perspective, right? Which is, if we see more women in film, and we believe, you know, the conversation we had in the Baby Girl episode, if we see more older women being depicted as desirable, then will society shift to see them as desirable? It's the same thing with mental health. Oh, I've got a little puppy coming to say hello. Oh, there you go. Marty wants to say something on the podcast. He's like, as a young man, I too. But I think it's the more we, and that's something that social media can do for the greater benefit, is the more we see men open up and talk about their mental health, it then, as you say, becomes more permissible for them. And that's something that social media can do to break barriers that is new in my generation versus in your generation. So the speed of change can be faster.
Yeah, I've seen I think Pete Wicks is starting a new podcast where he's talking about men and vulnerability and stuff. So I'm looking forward to listening to that. So if we start moving on to thinking about kind of what have we done?
Yeah.
You know, so what, I need to get the dog to sit down.
He's spread all 4 paws on each of our legs. Sir, would you like a cuddle? Hopefully this will be more successful than last time. Nope. Never mind.
So if you start thinking about, you know, what have we done?
Yeah.
You know, in terms of sharing our own journey and our own situation. So what have you used, Ames?
So I think obviously I was brought up by you, so I think I had a decent understanding of how to help myself. You know, we've spoken in previous episodes around the vocabulary you gave myself and my brother around emotions. We've spoken about the sort of coping strategies that you taught me around managing overwhelm and that kind of thing. But I think the biggest step that I took for myself and initiated by myself was I went to go and get some counselling when I was 15, 16. And I was very, very lucky that the school I went to had a counsellor at school. Honestly, if this was an episode to watch and not just listen to, it'd be this one, because we currently have a dog
Just lie down
on
there.
top of the sofa, like some kind of Christmas tree ornament.
Keep going.
Sorry, I'm distracted. But when I was 16, I went and got myself some counselling. And incredibly privileged that I was able to access that for free.
Because it was at school.
Because it was provided by the school. And they had and I didn't even know it existed, actually, because I remember a teacher telling me about it, because I was really upset because my boyfriend at the time had just broken up with me, and I was very, very, very upset. And I experienced panic for the first time, I think. And, you know, a teacher recommended that I go see the nurse, and the nurse then recommended I go and see the counsellor. And that was my first experience of talking therapy, and it was mind-blowing. And I found it really difficult. But I absolutely loved it. And I think, you know, I then repeated that when I was at university. Again, funnily enough, after another breakup, I went and got some therapy. And experiencing the difference between counselling and therapy was fascinating as well. And that would be, I'm slightly dipping into tips here, but that would be my biggest tip for people, is that counselling, therapy, coaching, 3 very, very different things. And actually, depending on what you're wanting to deal with, different types of talking to a professional will look very, very different for you. And I think counselling was right for me at 16, because counselling is very much about sort of the present moment. How can you know, and it feels a little bit lighter. You know, it's a good first step. And it is very much about, okay, how do we help you through the current issue that you are facing? Therapy is much more backwards looking, of like, okay, what's brought you here? Why is the thing that we're talking about whether it's overwhelming or upsetting or whatever it is. So the therapy I did was incredibly transformative, because I went into it thinking I was going to talk about my breakup, and then ended up talking about effectively I don't know how to put it. Well, we did a lot of work on my catastrophization and on I had this tendency, and I can still slip into it every now and then, of effectively thinking the world revolved around me. It was this fabulous therapy called action and commitment therapy, and it was all about my own understanding that I didn't cause other people to behave the way that they did. And I got into this whole spiral of like, you know, did he treat me that way because I caused him to? Did I make him angry? Did I make him want to do this? And effectively the therapy was like, get your head out your ass. Other people, you can do all of these different things, and other people make a choice to behave the way that they do. Give them agency and stop taking that away by thinking you're in control. And that was mind blowing, and it's to this day I think one of the most transformative things I've ever done for my own brain. And it sounds so stupid when you almost externalize it, like, well, of course other people choose how they behave. Like, of course I'm not sat here with I remember talking about it, like, I feel like I'm sat here with puppet strings of like da 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 da, and it's like, how ridiculous. I'm not God. Like, I'm not causing anyone to do anything in the same way that no one's causing me to do anything. And that was just mind-blowing for me. So I think those are the two big things that I have done from a self-help perspective. But I think it doesn't have to just be these big things. It is the little things of, like, if I find something interesting, research it, listen to a podcast, read an article, watch, I'm loving that TikTok is making stuff so much more accessible, of like, you can watch a 60-second video on truth telling or like whatever it is. So I think my biggest cornerstone of self-help is just, again, we go back to curiosity and wanting to continue to learn, and being okay that the way that I process the world right now, I might read something that will slightly change that, and that's okay. And just to play around with it, and like, it not always be this really big heavy thing of like, I've got a problem that I must solve. It's like, actually, is there just a better way or a different way that I could think about this that will make me feel a bit better? Anyway, I monologued on that a little bit, but can you tell I feel passionate about it?
I think it's good. I mean, from my side, I think I said, in my sort of 20s, I went on this sort of journey of self-discovery, and I did all sorts of wacky stuff. I did hypnotherapy. I became a Reiki healer. I
love that. I loved finding out about this era. Tell me more.
I went all the way down that whole alternative, kind of therapy route, which I really enjoyed, and I learned so much about myself. And it's interesting. A lot of people now don't know that I went down that whole kind of route. I probably did, it was before you were obviously born, but I probably went through 5, 6, 7 years of really immersing myself in all sorts of different genres. And that's when I became a coach. And when you become a coach, you do a lot of self-discovery as well, because you're being coached a lot of the time. You're coaching others, so you're constantly in this loop of learning about yourself. I've done a lot of personality testing, which again I think gives you a lot of understanding of who you are and why you operate in the way that you do. Read countless books, been on lots of retreats. And I've also had therapy. So when I separated from, your dad, going through that whole sort of separation and divorce phase, I had an incredible therapist that I went to up in London. And that was also very transformative in terms of helping me just come to terms with that whole episode, and helping me work out who I wanted to be. And I went off the back of it. The therapist that I was going to see, she also ran a women's only retreat, which was also, incredible and exactly what I needed at that moment in time. So I've done a lot.
What do you think is your favourite thing that you've done?
I don't know that there's what I think it's because I'm eclectic that I've done a range of things, and I'm a bit of a magpie. I like picking little bits, and I can get I can also find, because I've gone down that route, I find that there are some individuals that almost it becomes a bit cult-like.
Yes.
And
it goes back to that like kumbaya energy of like, let's all dance around a fire.
And I mean, I can do a bit of that, and I've done a bit of that, but also when people, just suddenly their whole life is revolving around this one thing, and when it gets to be a little bit culty is when I back out. And I remember somebody once gave me a brilliant metaphor, which I live my life by, which is, you can keep tinkering. If your mind is a car, you can have a beautiful car in a garage and you can keep tinkering with it, but if you don't ever get out and drive it, then what's the point?
I love that.
So I like to be eclectic, but I also like to spend time integrating what I've learned and actually get out and drive the car rather than let's play with another bit of the machinery.
That's fascinating. I love that.
But what I find sometimes with this sort of, when you go down the alternative route, is that people are like course junkies. They just go on the next one and they go on the next one, and I'm like, but what have you done with what you did on the first one?
Yeah, it's like that energy of like you and I talk about, like the uber enlightened.
Yes.
And it's like they live their life as if you know, and I'm sure they do have a huge amount of knowledge that the average Joe doesn't have, but it's the like air of superiority that comes with it that, you know, at least to me, my understanding of self-help is it's about like that integration within yourself, that helping yourself, and actually often that air of superiority is not helpful. It's ego driven as opposed to anything else.
Totally. And, you know, I can say all the right words, and I can, you know, I meditate in the morning, and I do yoga in the evening, and I only drink, you know, herbal teas and all of that sort of
and
stuff.
Like kudos to people who do that, but like I think it's how it.
But it's when you do that as if you're better than someone else. That's
because of the things that you do.
That's when it gets, for me, a bit icky, and a bit, because I've also been on courses where, you know, the trainers just, you know, are treated like gods, and you know, and have people running around holding their handbags and mopping their brows.
Wouldn't be able to stand it.
That sort of stuff for me is completely the opposite of what you're actually trying to help people with, which is, you know, how do you become better versions of yourself rather than putting yourself up on a pedestal because you're more enlightened than everybody else. Blech. Yeah.
Hate it.
So hence that I don't have a single thing. I like to sort of
What
pick
would you
and choose.
say your thing of the moment is?
I mean, I've had a lot of coaching. I haven't done anything for a while, and I feel like I'm ready to put my toe into something else, but I haven't yet found anything that feels grounded and solid enough. I'd love to do a bit more around family constellations, family system constellations. I'm kind of interested in that.
What does that mean?
It's where you it's working with your ancestry sort of lineage. You know, it's kind of what are you stuck with in today that might be something that you're carrying all the way back from your ancestors. So how do you kind of let go and, you know, this is going to sound weird, but have conversations with your lineage in order to be able to let go. And based on what I was saying about mum, you know, I was never really able to have a conversation with her. And I think I still carry quite a lot of undone stuff. So that interests me. Or potentially, I think I talked to you before about having some relationship coaching because of...
I hoped you were going to say that.
because of my resistance towards dating. So I think there's still some bits there that it would be useful for me to have some help with.
Yeah. So if we were to flip now in like a wrapping up kind of energy of, we've kind of sprinkled little tips and like thoughts through this, I guess, but if you were to sort of sum up in the realm of self-help, if you could sit a stranger down and talk to them about it, like what would you want to impart? What would you want to share?
I think the easiest thing is to get a book.
Yeah.
You know, is to actually read, get curious. Or if you don't like reading, listen to podcasts.
I was just about to say that. I was like, I cannot for the life of me read a non-fiction book.
Yeah.
I will chew through 90 fiction books a year, and I'm not exaggerating. But a non-fiction book, I will usually do one a year. I find them so difficult to get through.
Yeah. So I think depending on how you like learning, you know, either reading a book or listening to a podcast, I think just getting curious about, I guess, thinking to yourself, like, what if I could change one thing about myself, what would it be? And then how do I get curious about that?
And I guess, why would I want to change that?
Yes.
I think that's the other thing, is that like we can get so caught in this trap of always wanting to be better, always wanting to work on the new thing, which is great to a degree, but actually examining the why am I feeling like that, I think is as important as the what. Yeah,
I agree with that. And then I think if you haven't had counselling or therapy, I mean, I'd highly recommend it. I just don't...
give it a go.
Yeah,
if you've got the funds and access to be able to do so.
I mean, I think helping, you know, somebody who's qualified that can hold you in a space to do some self-discovery, I think is incredibly helpful. And I just think everyone at some point in their life, it's good to go and experience it. It's good to go and see how it might be able to, you know, support you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think building on that, I mean, my corporate HR hat slightly coming on here, but actually exploring, you know, if you're in the working world, exploring what kind of, you know, facilities, offers, that kind of thing that your work might be able to put on offer. You know, because there are lots of places that will do like employee helplines and things like that, of actually having a little bit of an explore and a dig around the edges of like, actually, what resources have I already got at my fingertips that I could play with first? And, you know, as you say, like dip your toe in the water and see what happens.
And I think for me, the word that's just popped into my head is shame. You know, is to not feel like there's something wrong with you. It's a voyage of discovery. It's something enjoyable.
Self-help's exciting.
To do.
It can be fun. Like it can bring up a lot, and it can feel hard, and it can, you know, I can certainly you know, if I think about the bigger pieces that I've done, it can be quite upsetting, and, you know, unpicking a lot of these mental things that have been going on in my own mind. But actually, you know, yes, that big work can feel really intense, but actually the little bits on the side, like for me, self-help is reading a fun book. It's getting outside on a walk. It's having a, you know, like we were binge watching Ted Lasso last night. That's a bit of self-help for me as well, because it's bringing some light, laughter, you know, into my life, which helps my, like, such a mother's daughter, which helps my spirit, you know. But it's like, actually, there are so many elements of self-help which can be so fun and so enjoyable that it doesn't always have to be this really big, intense, heavy experience. It can be, and they are incredibly helpful. And I would really encourage, as you say, that curiosity to explore that, because you never know what might come out on the other side of it. But yeah, just like, as you say, it going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, like self-help can feel so loaded. So let's almost like take that load off and just have, as you say, have a bit of a voyage of discovery, have a bit of an explore and a try. Yeah.
And I guess my last bit that I wanted to make was, you mentioned about counselling and therapy and coach, and then you also talked about coaching. You gave a beautiful description of counselling and therapy.
I thought I might leave that to you.
So coaching is, you know, if counselling is looking at today, therapy is looking at the past, coaching is about how do you want to take something forward. So it's much more sort of action orientated. And there was a boom around life coaching. Be careful is my only, you know, make sure you've got somebody qualified, because it's an unregulated sector. So there are a lot of people that might go on a weekend course and then say that they're a life coach. So just do your research if you're going to go down that area. But there are potentially also some very good life coaches out there. So that would be my only thing in adding to the 3 that you mentioned.
Yes, a little past, present, future little view. I love this. This is such a fun. You and I love chatting about this stuff.
We do.
And I think, like, to bring it full circle, I think, you know, self-help is it can be such an interesting conversation to have with other people, but fundamentally the conversation about how you feel about self-help is with yourself. So hopefully this has sparked a couple of thoughts, maybe it's inspired someone to go and give something a little try, but ultimately it's whatever feels right for you and feels comfortable for you. That's the most important thing.
And if anybody who's listening to this would love Amy and I to talk a little bit more about our experience of therapy or counselling, just because you're thinking about it,
and want to know what goes on behind closed doors, I'm more than happy to share about that, because I remember walking into my first counselling session and just having absolutely no idea what to expect, going like, am I going to be lying on a chaise lounge and someone's just going to pick my brain apart, you know? So if you're toying about it, would like us to share more, you know, we're very happy to be vulnerable and to talk about our experiences in more detail if that would be helpful. So let us know on Chatter Matters Pod at outlook.com.
We'd love to hear from you.
Amazing, fabulous. Well, I hope you have a lovely week, Mum.
And you, Ames.
And I hope everyone else has a lovely week as well.
Thanks for listening.
See you later.
Bye.